The characters of The Office need to be put in a tier list of how creepy the men truly are. We're going to focus on the males, go through who's the biggest creep, who's the least biggest creep. So the higher you are in the tier list, the bigger creep you are. Let's do the men. We'll start with Charles Minor. Now, Charles Minor is not much of a creep at all. He's in F tier. He's a Chad. Same with David Wallace. These guys clearly don't display much creepiness at all throughout the series. Michael Scott shows a lot of creepiness, in particular towards the chair lady from the ad. He's not afraid to hit on anybody. He's making inappropriate jokes. But genuinely, deep down, he's not as big of a creep as some of these true monsters on here. Now, we're going to cover Hank. I feel like Hank is also a Chad. He can go into F tier, just not creepy enough. Mose, let's jump right to Mose. Mose is probably A tier. I would say he's likely to end up low A tier. Very creepy, but he's also this like incredibly bizarre farm. He spends a lot of time isolated on a farm, and we don't really get too much specifics on his backstory, so we don't get the true intent behind a lot of his actions, so hard to really place him. Oscar. Oscar's similar to Michael. You know, definitely lower than Michael, but probably fair to put him on B tier. Well, Glenn. Now, Glenn is clearly S tier, incredibly creepy. Becomes super obsessed with Aaron. Freakishly obsessed. Anytime he's like going for any of the other female characters, it's bizarre. It's wacky. It's disturbing. I feel like they brought him in and he kind of manifests a lot of the creepy traits of the other male characters who they decided to turn into like the good guys. He kind of like becomes the Dwight or the Andy or even the like Creed in a lot of aspects. We'll cover Pete. Pete's pretty normal. Just a young guy. I'm debating on putting him on F tier or C tier for his level of creepiness. I think probably high F or low C. We'll put him on C for now. And I think we'll put his counterpart, the character that he clearly is semi-meant to replicate, who he's there to be a stand-in for, is Jim. Now, Jim is a little more creepy than Pete, so we'll put Jim. I mean, the dude freakishly obsesses over Pam. Even when Pam's engaged and about to get married, even when he's in a relationship with Karen. I don't know. I just don't. Jim's a creep. Kevin Malone. Kevin Malone doesn't really do that much creepy stuff, realistically. Considering his overall, like, social behavior, he could have been a lot more creepy. He really never reaches the heights of, like, even Oscar in his creepiness. So, we'll put him low B tier. Clark's pretty creepy, just like Pete, but obviously he's more creepy than Pete. But he does it in a playful, like, young guy kind of way, so it's less, like, sinister than, like, say, Glenn. And it's not as severe as Glenn, obviously, but it's definitely less sinister. Clark, I'll put him above Jim, but he's definitely occupying the C tier. Todd Packer. Now, Packer's a creep. But he's more of a, like, in-your-face kind of creep. He's out front with it. There's no denying it. He's not trying to hide it. He's not trying to be anybody besides himself. So I would say he definitely does not deserve S tier. And he'll probably be at the bottom of A tier along with Mose. Stanley cheats. He actually cheats a lot. But he does, at least he tries to keep it private. I think I gotta put him maybe in C tier. He's maybe, yeah, below Pete. Daryl. Now Daryl, in particular, it's real creepy that he dates Kelly, as Kelly, even though he knows that Kelly is obsessed with Ryan, and then he simps like crazy over Val. Like, that Val stuff just creeps me out because she's like barely into him and he's so intense about it. Like, there's a way you can be into a coworker and just be like super casual, like play it cool, and you absolutely should, because it's awkward and you're putting the other person in a really awkward position by hitting on them. So, I mean, it's weird because early on, in the early seasons, he's very smooth, and he just kind of like drops the ball with the Val stuff, and it's unfortunate. So I gotta put him above Kevin in the creep list. Probably even above Oscar, realistically. Roy. Well, Roy, he's hung up. His real creepy parts are when he's hung up on Pam. In the early seasons, like after him and Pam split up, and Pam's not, and Jim's with Karen, and Roy's just kind of like trying to get back with Pam, and he's like obsessive, but he's also been in a relationship with this woman for a very long time, so it's understanding. It's a rough breakup. He didn't want for them to break up. So it's a lot more understandable. Obviously, he takes it too far by becoming violent. But he literally like immediately apologizes. So I think I got to put him bottom of C tier. He doesn't quite have that Chad energy of the F tier. I'll put Bob Vance down here too. Vance Refrigeration. I think I'll put Wallace and Charles Minor like at the bottom of F tier, the least creepy. We'll do the weird bosses. So we'll start with Will Ferrell's character. Why is it not coming to mind? It's what is this character's name? And D'Angelo. D'Angelo's pretty obnoxiously creepy. But once we get later on in the list, you'll see that people will really kind of break down the horrible stuff that people do. Obviously, he's no Glenn. He's probably he has this intense creepiness, though. Now, that could be like unjustified judgment of him. I think top of A tier. Yeah, top of A tier, because although he is an incredibly creepy presence, and he has some really terrible views, and he like is a creep, I feel like he's nowhere near the many like layers of creep that somebody like Glenn is, where Glenn is like creepy to be around, just in a general, he's just this lurking, frightening guy. D'Angelo's also, he's like a lurking, frightening guy, but he's not lurking as much. He's not like actively a frightening person. It's like he just happens to be a frightening person. He doesn't like want to be. He's not trying to be. So yeah, top of A tier. Now Robert California. Robert California is extremely creepy. He's constantly saying creepy things. Just a monster of a creep. He's probably outdone by Glenn, though. Like, realistically, in your heart of hearts, you know that Glenn is a bigger creep than him. So, Robert California, second place for now. Will he hold that spot as we work through the remaining men of the office? Probably. Let's move on to Dwight. Dwight, he's violent, aggressive, obnoxious. He's definitely a lurking presence. Ultimately, though, he's a good guy. His weird simping for Michael is creepy, though. Like, realistically, like, think about early on Michael Scott. When he's staring at Ryan and making these really, like, kind of charged comments at Ryan. Really weird. And it's also weird that Dwight has a similar kind of dynamic with Michael. Like, it's creepy, right? Like, you can't say that Michael's not being a creep in those instances. You know what? I'm going to put Michael up to A tier. I'll put him right with his buddy Packer. Because I think realistically, think about all of Michael's actions. Like, think of all the horrible things he said to, like, all of the female characters in his show. And then and then pile what he said to Ryan throughout this show. Like, it's truly intense. Now, we have Dwight. Dwight, I think maybe he does belong in B tier. Like, when he does date that farmer girl. Why can't I think of characters' names? Now, part of that's due to his upbringing and his traditions and his beliefs, but he's still pretty creepy. And think of early on when he's dating Angela, and like, he doesn't understand. So, doesn't understand how a lot of things work. So he has a much more innocent creepiness to it, but it's definitely there. It's definitely valid. So I think bottom of B tier is appropriate for Dwight. And that's kind of why I wanted to make this list, is to kind of point out how freaking insanely creepy so many of these male characters in this show truly are. And we've still got like four creeps left to place on the list. Like, it's not just, like I said, I feel like these top two, Glenn and Robert California, they take on a lot of these creeper traits that a lot of the male characters had earlier on in the series, right? Like Michael, his creepiness towards like Ryan, there's less of it as the series goes on, and it becomes like more of a joke, but it still happens in this, even though it's more so early in the series, it's still there. It's still not good. Ryan himself treats Kelly like dirt. He asks out Pam, he asks out Karen, he asks out Aaron. He's probably asked out Jan, we just don't see it. He's probably asked out Holly, but we don't see it. Dude's a massive creep. He like breaks up with Kelly when he gets his job at corporate. Dude's his character shifts, right? He becomes this totally different character once he gets that job at corporate. Like, his character really goes through he becomes this massive degenerate. Like, he starts as like this straight man, this outside person who's interning at the office, but by the end he's like one of the worst people. Ryan, I feel like I could put him in A tier. But he's below Michael for sure, though. But he's pretty bad. Creed. Creed's a crazy person. He goes, he pays for the privilege to use the women's bathroom. He, it seems like he's possibly a serial killer throughout the series. Different times he's like living in the office. Bizarre. He seems to have like serious, either he's faking that he's completely crazy or he's just actually totally crazy. Never really, besides that like serial killer creepiness and old person craziness, he's not really that big of a creep. Like, he's kind of this weird like neutral entity. I think I gotta put him low, like surprisingly low. Actually, right there in B tier might be where I put him. I was thinking of putting him in C, above Clark. And maybe I put him above Dwight and Kevin and Oscar. Alright, I'll be a little more fair. I'll put him right behind Daryl. Like, again, think of when Daryl is simping on Val and how creepy and forced that is. Creed never really does anything like that far, right? I mean, he does. Like, he does things that are pretty crazy and would creep the hell out of like anybody if you actually worked there with him. But, I mean, would you know if you worked with Daryl when that stuff's going on? I mean, like when he's dating Kelly, when he's like dating Val or pursuing Val or whatever, you would be like pretty. You'd be looking sideways at him for sure. We'll move on to Toby, the Strangler, Mr. Flenderson. Now Toby is wild. Like, Toby is absurd. Like, I think at 2 different points he like grabs Pam's leg while she's like in a relationship with somebody else, and like does like all these creepy. He does like creepy hugs with like Pam and with Nellie later on, and he just assumes he's in this relationship with Nellie. Just wild. He like moves to Costa Rica because he's like so hung up on Pam. He is this like old guy he's kind of like Jim in a lot of ways. Like, Jim's a lot creepier than people give him credit for. I feel like Toby's just that, but he's older. He's not like funny. And he's just like an old guy, so clearly Pam's like not gonna go for him. And he's just kind of this like weird sad sack. Truly just a freak. Like, just a freaky guy. He's definitely going above Michael. He's definitely going above Packer. Now, Mose, D'Angelo, not sure about that. Again, D'Angelo never really, like, Mose and D'Angelo, they never truly do anything that like predatory creepiness, right? They're just kind of crazy people. So I think Toby has to go above them. Now, does Toby break his way into S tier? We'll see. We'll leave him lingering at top of A, approaching S. I'm very confident with the 2 that are there, but we've got one more guy to talk about, and that is Andy Bernard, the Nard Dog. Now, I don't judge him too much for how bad of a boyfriend he was to Aaron. It was more so like some of the details of how bad he is and the weird things he does, especially once he like comes back from the boat trip. He just has this energy about him, this dismissiveness, this uncaring for how other people feel. I feel like Andy is the true villain of this series, but they didn't know what to do without the Michael Scott character, so they wanted to form They wanted to turn Andy into Michael Scott, and it didn't work, and they shouldn't have done it because the guy's a total piece of crap, right? That's his whole character, is he starts out and he's annoying. He's like, skibbity boop, like, just really annoying. One of the first pranks that, like, gets played on him when he joins Dunder Mifflin Scranton is Jim hides his cell phone from him. Now, and then he keeps calling the cell phone, and Andy punches a hole in the wall, right? And then he's like creepily screaming like, "You think it's funny?" And like just this insane douchebag, this rich douchebag. And then how he handles the whole like Aaron and Jessica, I think that was his other like girlfriend's name. Egg, just super gross in the way he uses his power when he becomes the manager. Egg, it's just so much ick. And then him dating Angela, like he's this weird, creepy, desperate cuck. Super weird. But there's one thing in particular that I think elevates him above a lot of these people. Now think back to what's the creepiest thing that Andy Bernard has done, right? First of all, how old is Andy Bernard? Remember when Aaron joins the office and like Dwight and Andy are like going for? How young is her character and how old are these characters, right? Like, he seems like at that point in the series he's like 40 or older, and he's hitting on this like 20-year-old who has no business like dating him. It's so freaky and weird. I don't even care that much about that kind of thing. Like, adults are adults, they can do whatever they want. But earlier than that, Andy, him and Jim go on they go to a high school. And Andy sees his girlfriend is one of the students there. That's crazy, right? He's like, "Oh, you didn't tell me you were a high school student." And she's like, "This is weird." And then as the episode progresses, he's like, "Who is that guy she's with?" Right? And Jim says, "Oh, that's probably another high school student." And Jim has to tell him like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter because it's a felony." And think about Andy's response, right? Like, Andy's he's kind of like heartbroken and worried. Not worried in the sense that he should be, right? Of like legal repercussions of what's just happened. The fact that he's at that moment in a high school talking to his coworker about his high school girlfriend. Like, as in, she is a student at this high school, and he is a grown man in his 30s. Oh my god, he should be like fleeing this high school and be like terrified, being like, "Oh my god, I didn't know. I'm getting out of here right this minute." But he's just like, "Oh, like, who's that guy she was with?" Like, he's worried that she's giving another guy attention. It's so demented, right? Like, how does that just get dropped? I get it. It's like it's a comedy show. But oh my god, the fact that Andy like isn't the least bit concerned and he's this like rich douchebag. It's like, how many other times has he done stuff like this? How does he date somebody who's in high school for who knows how long? Like, you get the impression that they've been dating for like a little bit, right? Like, he literally refers to her as his girlfriend. What is happening? Like, what? How do you date somebody? There's no way that you're in your 30s. You date somebody who's in high school, and you never like communicate about everything. He even says, "Oh, like," mentions that he went with her and her friends to like smash mailboxes from a vehicle, which I don't think anybody ever actually really does. But it's like, so he's met her friends, he's hung out with her and her friends, and the topic of their age has never come up, or like any of their interests or anything. Like, what in the frick? That's impossible. That's literally not possible. So I'm sorry, but Andy is like a confirmed really terrible thing. He is clearly S tier, absolute piece of trash. Now, is he as bad as Robert California? Is he as bad as Glenn? I don't think that he is, necessarily. He's potentially worse, but we don't know that for a fact. He probably is worse in a lot of ways. But would you put it past Robert California? No, you wouldn't. Would you put it past Glenn? Now, maybe that's unfair to Glenn. Maybe. Right? So I'm kind of factoring in, I wouldn't put it past Glenn, but I do factor in that Glenn, even as just like a coworker, even as just a person existing, is like non-stop creepy towards everyone. Man, woman, or child, right? So, for that is why I place Glenn at the very top. Toby, I will leave Toby at the top of A tier, because as far as we know, he hasn't done anything as crazy as that S tier. That is my list of the biggest male creeps in the office, right? We could do female, but it wouldn't be as interesting. Clearly Meredith in like Jan would be like top, and like Kelly, but I mean they don't. I feel like only Meredith really reaches anything approaching the S tier of the men of this show. And I really wanted to point out that specifically what Andy does is incredibly, insanely gross. And what a lot of the male characters in this show do. They're just total, like, grease balls. A lot of them. And it goes, a lot of people really love this show. I really love this show. I've watched it start to finish several times. But my goodness, the males in this show are kind of monsters.